It's now time to tune into Folkways FM for August 2022's Almanac. The ship is still in Ravenglass in the Lake District as far as I know. Apparently one of the staff members got some summer work washing dishes in the Ratty Arms pub, or so I've been told. They recommend the garlic mushrooms as a starter if you're passing. So without further ado, let's try and pick them up. Kick things off, here's Blackberry Picking by the great Seamus Heaney. Late August, given heavy rain and sun, for a full week the blackberries would ripen. At first, just one, a glossy purple clot amongst others, red-green, hard as a knot. You ate that first one, and its flesh was sweet. Like thickened wine, summer's blood was in it, leaving stains upon the tongue and lust for picking. The red ones inked up, and that hunger sent us out with milk cans, pea tins, jam pots, where briars scratched and wet grass bleached our boots. Round hayfields, cornfields, and potato drills we trekked and picked until the cans were full, until the tinkling bottom had been covered with green ones, and on top big dark blobs burned like a plate of eyes. Our hands were peppered with thorn pricks, our palms sticky as bluebeards. We hoarded the fresh berries and the burr. But when the bath was filled, we found a fur, a rat-grey fungus glutting on our cash. The juice was stinking too. Once off the bush, the fruit fermented, the sweet flesh would turn sour. I always felt like crying. It wasn't fair that all the lovely canfuls smelt of rot. Each year, I hoped they'd keep, knew that they would not. When considering poetry, I often think of this line of Heaney's. When a poem rhymes, he commented, when a form generates itself, when a metre provokes consciousness into new postures, it is already on the side of life. August, derived from the Latin word augere, meaning to increase. As a name, it had the meaning esteemed or venerable, and was a title given to Roman emperors. Indeed, the month is named after Rome's first emperor, Augustus. In Welsh, Aust, Cornish, mis est. In Irish, Scots Gaelic, and Manx, the month is named after the festival Lughnasadh, which we will get to in a minute. In Irish, Lughnasadh, Scots Gaelic, and Lughnasadh, Manx, Lughnasadh. In Manx, it's also known as Toideag Award. Manx often has several names for each month, which I assure you isn't confusing at all. And in Old English, before we got all Romaned, this month was known as Weodmanath, the month of weeds. However, not solely in the way we use the word now as a nuisance plant, but rather pointing to the lush greenery that abounds. The beginning of August sees the first of the calendar's harvest festivals. This is Lammas, or Lughnasadh, as we just spoke about, festival of the first fruits. The first grain has been harvested, milled, and from this the very first loaf baked. This first bread has all sorts of significance. Up until this point, we relied on last year's grain. Indeed, July was often called Lean July, or in Irish, Uail na Cabochta, July of the cabbage. Though the natural world is lush around us, harvest is still to come, and last year's grain supplies are done. The harvesting of this year's first grain to make this loaf, which you hold tightly in your hands, means, essentially, things are looking good. Your hard labour is paid off, and your chances of making it through till the next harvest are greatly increased. No small feat at all. Anyone who's eaten anything they've grown themselves knows the satisfaction, how you pay far more attention to each mouthful. Well, if you knew this mouthful suggested that not only your family, but perhaps the wider community had a decent chance of survival through until the next year, how much sweeter might that bite be? Rites included a solemn cutting of the first of the corn, of which an offering would be made by bringing it up to a high place and burying it, as Moya McNeill's celebrated the festival of Lughnasadh makes clear. There is a good deal of evidence of this type of ritual in Ireland, also on the Isle of Man, where people primarily gathered on hills or beside lakes and rivers. In the Scottish Highlands, the rites were quite different, however, and they seemed to focus on renewing the protection over their homes and cattle that was started at the beginning of summer, with rowan crosses being put over doors. Despite the difference in customs, which are important and we sometimes see diminished or ignored, the significance of the first grain is still hard to miss. The Anglo-Saxons called this date Loafmas, which became Lammas. We often now see Lughnasadh and Lammas used interchangeably as names for this time. So how do we know the Anglos were in on it too? So the date of Lammas was named in the Anglo-Saxon Chronicle, quote, "the same summer betwixt Lammas and midsummer." It also made an appearance in the early English text, the Red Book of Derby. As was made clear here, the first ripe cereals were reaped and baked into bread, which was consecrated at church on that day. We find a delightful Anglo-Saxon charm which advised the splitting of this sacred first bread into 4 pieces and the crumbling of each in the 4 corners of the barn to bless the grain that was about to arrive here. Into more modern times, the significance of this date has remained. It was adopted into the Christian year as smooth as honey, and of course you'll still find first harvest inspired ceremonies, the church happily using the term Lammas. On my Buy Me a Coffee page you'll find a great video of a professor and a vicar discussing the celebration, very much worthy of your time. Speaking in more general terms now, first harvest rites up until relatively recently did often contain certain themes. We've looked at the first loaf, but how the fields were reaped was also given attention. What we might call the spirit of the harvest was considered. Through various rites we can see this spirit was believed to dwell in the fields, and as the reapers continued their work cutting, the spirit was forced to retreat to the ever-diminishing remains. In Hertfordshire, at the end of the reaping, there used to be a ceremony called crying the mare. While harvesting the fields, the reapers would leave a small patch uncut and tie up the stalks, calling the result a mare. When the harvest was complete in that field, they took turns cutting down the mare, then divided into 2 teams and sang around. First, "I have here." "What have you?" "A mare." "What will you do with her?" "We'll send her to," and then they named the next farmer to do the reaping. The mare would be passed to each farmer in turn until every field had been reaped. The last farmer would then keep the mare through the winter. In Shropshire the custom is similar. The farmer who finishes his harvest last, and who therefore cannot send the mare to anyone else, is said to keep her all winter. And in Ireland we certainly see last sheaf rites also. The final bundle of grain left standing in the field was ceremoniously plaited before being cut. Reapers would at times stand back and throw their hooks at it to cut it, sometimes being blindfolded and spun around before doing so to add to the hilarity. What could go wrong? The cutting of this last sheaf was met with great jubilation and cheering, and the lucky reaper who managed to cut it was often showered with drops of whiskey or water before hosting a harvest home celebratory feast, which marked the end of the reaping, to which all were invited, and which had the last sheaf as its ceremonial centrepiece. And thank you to the Folklore podcast at University College Dublin for that information. If you woke up in Galway on the 1st of August, the sun rose at 5:52 and set at 21:31. Glasgow, sun rose at 5:21 and set at 21:23. And Guildford, the sun rose at 5:26 and set at 20:49. Unfortunately, we've lost an hour's daylight since this time last month. The moon is full on Thursday the 11th of August and will be slipping away until the new moon on Saturday the 27th of August. This 11th full moon has been known across these islands as the dispute moon, lynx moon, grain moon, or lightning moon. The Milky Way is now running up the eastern side of the sky, where Cassiopeia may be found within it, high in the northeast. And talking of the Milky Way, if you enjoy a cup of tea, why not treat yourself to a celestial cuppa? Lying low above the southern horizon is the constellation of Sagittarius, home to a well-known asterism or pattern of stars called the Teapot. Under good sky conditions, our home galaxy, the Milky Way, appears as steam rising out of the spout of the teapot, with the centre of the galaxy lying to the upper right tip of the spout. The super famous Perseids meteor shower can be spotted this month, known for their spectacular display during the warm nights of summer. Circle the 12th to the 13th of August in your diaries when they'll be at their peak, perhaps reaching as many as 100 meteors per hour. In some Catholic countries, they're known as the Tears of St. Lawrence because they're visible on the date of his martyrdom. Those who are on the ball will have noted this is just after the date of the full moon, therefore conditions will be far from ideal to spot the showers. However, don't be discouraged from heading outside and taking a peek. Taking inspiration from good old gardener's world, let's look at some jobs in the garden. So you can use net or fleece to protect blackberries and autumn raspberries from the birds. Sow hardy crops such as landcress, rocket, and corn salad for winter pickings. Harvest fresh herbs and hang them up to dry, then store in jars. Or, here's a brilliant one, freeze them in ice cubes for winter use. Genius. For foraging, this month you can find, firstly, blackberries, of course, crabapple, elderberry, hazelnut, and rowan berries. The rowan tree is also known as mountain ash, or in Old Celtic a name which translates as wizard's tree, reflecting its long association with magic and witches. Rowans were once planted to protect farm cottages from roaming witches, and can still be found around many farmyards. Your challenge this month is to do some stargazing. I know we mentioned it earlier, but with how completely effing nuts the world is right now, i.e. you will eat the bugs, I'd like to invite you to head out into your garden or balcony with a chair, or go for a late night stroll. Take a flask of tea or something stronger out with you. There are brilliant stargazing apps now, as I'm sure you know, so if you haven't downloaded one, give it a go, or just do what I do, which is try to guess. This is a grounding thing to do. If we don't look after ourselves, how can we be of use to anyone else? So look after yourself.